morning. We're here today because we're celebrating someone who gave so much to this country, an individual who stood at a time when many men were failing to stand, who spoke when there were those who refused to speak, who fought when there are those who had capitulated and compromised and refused to fight. Dr. King believed that rights and privileges and the protection of the Constitution were first bequeathed to every American by their Creator, their God and their Father in heaven. Dr. King was a conservative Baptist minister, conservative in the scriptures, who believed that God created man in his own image, and that believed that man was supposed to stand and live in that image that he was taught from the scriptures. We cannot celebrate Dr. King without celebrating what he believed and what he stood for. And oftentimes, as we deal with the legends and the myths of Dr. King, we forget that that was a human being, a man with flaws and faults and failures, just like every last one of us. But a man who set aside his fears, and as I watched him on the last speech that he made, a man that while his voice, that strong baritone voice, may have trembled just a little bit, the words that he spoke that night made an impression on me as a young man and many and all of the men that are standing here today. I want you to know that there have been many men and women who have served on this floor for over 40, almost 50 years. Men and women who sat on this floor. The Black Caucus was created in here. Many of the rules and ethics were created in here. African Americans sat beside those who did not necessarily look like them and worked out compromises and bills that made the state of Tennessee strong. One of the things that Tennessee could always brag about was the fact that we had men and women who built bridges. Larry Miller, who stands here behind me, has served longer than anybody on this floor. He is one who has come, has fought, has stood, has chaired a committee, and not just him, but many others who we forget their names, who fought on this floor, who stood on this floor, and made bills and speeches and did wonderful things that made the state of Tennessee become a better place. White men, black men, white women, black women worked together, and I sat on this floor for 26 years. And I saw people stand together. That wasn't many times. There were times when we fought, but then we would fight, and it wasn't personal, and we would go and sit down and have dinner together because our hearts were right, because we loved the state of Tennessee. Dr. King loved this nation. And sometimes we need to be reminded of the fact that we are all Americans. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for patriotism in its truest sense. He stood for faith in God, justice, the dignity of brotherhood as an American, our mutual responsibility to have her, our nation, live up to the promises of his founding generation. Dr. King skillfully, and I remember hearing him speak on many occasions, and on a few occasions as a young man with the Memphis 13 and Dr. Kyle and many of the others who were around him all the time, heard him interweave the founding ideas and principles of this nation into an effort to secure those rights, blessings for blacks and disadvantaged citizens who at that time were denied what men and women of color merited and deserved because of their sacrifice, because of their contribution since the beginning of this republic. I remember walking with my father when we turned the corner there in Memphis in the march, a few rows behind Dr. King. And someone introduced me one time as civil rights hero. I want you to understand something, my brothers and my sisters. I was not a hero. I was a scared kid holding on to my daddy's britches. And as my daddy, I saw on his face, I did not see fear on that Korean War era veteran's face. I did not see a man who was ready to turn and run as a teenager. I was ready to run. But I looked at his face and I found courage not just from him, but from men and women, black and white, Jew and Gentile, of all religions and ethnicities, who stood together for what had to happen in this nation, knowing that America had to change and they were going to be the change agents. My father's face showed a courage that encouraged me. And that generation was a wonderful generation. My father in 1968, when he said it is time to integrate the schools, I had gone to a wonderful school called Central High School, which was an all-black school. But there were so many things that they were not given. And my father said, my children are going to have all the advantages and we're going to open the door for the other children. And in 1968, he sent us to Alamo High School in Crockett County, where we had moved from Memphis. I asked my father, what do I do? What do I do when I go to school with these white children? My daddy said, you go to school. And I said, my 5 brothers and sisters are looking at me, the eldest, and want me to talk to the man. And I said, Daddy, what do we do when we go to that school? He said, you go to school. And after I had inquired a couple of times, I finally got on his nerves. He called me Nick. He said, Nick, you go to school. And he said something that Dr. King's father told him. He said, you don't scratch your head when it ain't itching. You don't grin when it ain't funny. He said, you be a man. He said, if you stand up as a man, you give respect, you will receive respect. That's what I did at that school. And many of those young men and women are my friends to this day, and they come to Capitol Hill to check on me 50 years later after integration. And that next year, the schools integrated with no problem because folks went where they chose to go. Many of them came to Alamo High, and integration in Crockett County had absolutely no problem at all. Dr. King loved this country. He loved it. And he made a claim to the blessings, the rights, the privileges, not as beggars. Those men and women that day in Memphis didn't come with their hat in their hand as beggars and undeserving and interlopers. They came as veterans, as business owners, as mothers, as fathers, as husbands, as wives, as ministers, as professors, as men and women of substance who had given to this country as their ancestors had from the very beginning of the thought of independence of America. And when they walked that day, I, as a young man, I found the courage and the strength to do what I had to do for the rest of my life, looking at the face of my father. When we went to that school, my daddy said this to me. When I came home one day complaining about something at the school, he took his glasses off. He looked me dead in the eye, and he said to me, Nick, you can't stop being colored, so you may as well stop being scared. And on that day, I will take nothing for the fact that I did drink out of the colored water fountain, as some of my companions up here in this well who are old enough also did. I did ride on the back of the bus. I did go to the zoo on Tuesday, which was colored day. I did sit in the balcony of the Orpheum where colored people were supposed to sit. I would take nothing for those experiences because I know where we have come from. I know the advancements that we have made. I know that we are a better nation. I know that we are a better people. I know we still got our fears, our faults, our failures, our flaws, our flops, but we try and struggle to live our faith, our faith. And my brothers and sisters, if we live our faith, if we stop trying to understand everything and simply trust God. As the Apostle Paul said one time, we walk by faith and not by sight. The enemy is always going to show you something to be angry about. The enemy is always going to show you something to be upset about. The enemy is always going to have mix of words as we deal with words and philosophies and ideologies and theologies. But I want you to know that day I saw those men and women, they weren't facing words, they were facing dogs. They were facing billy clubs. They were facing a fire hose from a fire truck that I saw push a woman all the way across the street and almost undress that poor woman from the force of that fire hose. Those men and women showed courage in the face of real danger, not just talk, but real danger. And they stood, and they did not flinch, and they did not compromise. I saw them with my own eyes join their arms and said, ain't nobody, help me brothers, gonna turn me around. I saw them do that. And what I'm saying to y'all on this floor, that the people of this nation, the people of the state of Tennessee, we didn't, in my generation, we didn't read this stuff in a book. We lived this stuff. We didn't see this stuff in pictures. I saw it in reality. We don't read about the dogs, we heard them snarl. And I want you to understand, all they did was encourage us to be strong, to be smart, and to succeed. Frederick Douglass one time said, education makes a man unfit to be a slave. When we educate our children, when we educate ourselves, we are unfit to be a slave to immorality, a slave to materialism and worldliness, a slave to debauchery, a slave to all the various ideologies and philosophies that tear us apart and make us fight one another every day. We look back at those men, Dr. King, and I can remember listening to that speech when that good man said, I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. And Lord have mercy, if God could let him and my father and others of that tremendous generation come back and look at us today, those who had that dream, that we would be able to sit down and talk to each other and reason together and compromise and do those things that are right. I have a dream, he says, that my little children will one day be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. At some point, we got to stop dealing with every issue as though it is a race issue. We've got to disagree without becoming disagreeable. We've got to make our stand with respect for the other man's stand. We've got to give our opinion while listening to the other man's opinion. And then when everybody has had their say, nobody just gets their way, and everybody builds a bridge that is good for the people of the state of Tennessee. When you're born in this world, you look like your parents. Your mama, daddy, grandmama, granddaddy, maybe an uncle or aunt or brother or sister. When we're born in this world, we look like our parents. When we leave this world, we look like our choices. America used to look like its parents. Used to look like the founding fathers, black and white, those of ethnicities from all over the world who had escaped the monarchies and tyranny of Europe and other places and come here with a faith saying we will start a country where we, the people, make the decisions. We used to look like our parents, but now we're beginning to look like our choices. Our choice to hate, our choice to be divided, our choice to be belligerent, our choice to not be understanding, our choice to not build brotherhood. Martin Luther King said, we will live together as brothers, or we will die and perish together as fools. We have to make that decision. Let me leave you with this. An eagle is a bird respected in the state of Tennessee because it's indigenous to our beautiful state. This beautiful, majestic bird, when he spreads his wings out, it's 6, 7, and 8 feet wide of this beautiful bird that God created. There's another bird God created. It's a raven. And a raven with big feet and long claws would get right on the back of the scruff of the neck of the eagle. And he digs his claws in deep into that eagle's feathers, and he holds tight. He holds tight. He holds tight. And he pecks. He pecks on the back of the eagle's head. He can't defeat the eagle, but he pecks and he pecks and he pecks on the back of the eagle's neck. And the eagle is aggravated and frustrated. He flies, he flips, he turns, he does everything he can do. But he cannot shake that raven off because his claws, those talons, are so deep in his feathers. But God created that eagle. And that eagle spreads those 6, 7, 8 foot wings. And he looks to the heavens and he begins to soar. And he soars higher and higher and higher and higher, and he soars higher and higher. And at some point, that eagle has gone so high in his soaring that the raven, who cannot compete, loses consciousness and falls off of his back because he soared. When the pecking and aggravation continues, when the pecking and aggravation gets on your nerves, when the pecking and aggravation is causing division and belligerence and causing us to have all types of ill feelings, that's when you soar. That's when you soar. That's when you show the best of yourself, the strongest of yourself. That's when you show brotherhood and sisterhood and faith and strength. That's when you show you are God's children and you soar. And when you soar, you watch those who are just pecking. You watch them fall away. Thank you.